Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the Gentle Art of Crushing It show, where we focus on learning and sharing with our listeners all there is to know about how to create success in our lives. This show stands on the shoulders of giants. Our mission is to empower and inspire our listeners to create the life of their dreams whilst having a blast in the process. Let's celebrate life together. Welcome to the show.
All right, welcome back to the Gentle Art of Crushing It podcast. My name is Randy Smith, and I'll be your host today. And I am just really excited to have Gene Trowbridge with us today. Gene is a syndication attorney. He's the co-founding partner of Trowbridge Law Group. Prior to becoming an attorney, he was actually a syndicator. He's the author of It's a Whole New Business, which is the how-to Bible on a whole new business around syndication, and is a really well-respected educator. So, Gene, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you, Randy. Appreciate being here.
All right. Well, let's jump right in. Gene, can you give the audience kind of your perspective on where we are at in the markets and how that could be impacting the passive investors of today?
Well, what I think is happening, because I represent the syndicators all around the country. And I think that what we see is there's a lot of money on the sidelines to be invested. I think money stopped being invested maybe 18 months to 2 years ago. 2001 was the height of the syndication business. And every year since, the volume has been going down. So I think there's a lot of money out there, but I also think that there are few projects. I think that the people who bought properties 5 or 6 years ago in the height of the market aren't maybe educated enough or understand that the prices are different today, and maybe they haven't agreed to reduce their price like they should. And the syndicators aren't jumping on overpriced properties, quote unquote.
Sure.
And so the passives maybe are just sitting and waiting. Although, Randy, I will tell you that within the last 4 months, let's say since the first of the year, now the volume is picking up. The number of syndications that we see coming across our desk from clients is picking up. And there's quite a few new clients coming to us. We do have a bunch of existing clients who are dealing with capital calls and interest rate caps, and so they're not raising money today. But the new syndicators are out buying properties today. It's interesting.
Are you interested in real estate investing but don't know where to get started or think you don't have the time or money? Are you stuck in your W-2 because the golden handcuffs make it hard to walk away? If this sounds like you, check out impactequity.net and schedule some time to talk with the founder, Randy Smith. Randy went from massive income to leaving his W-2 through passive income, and he can help you do the same. www.impactequity.net.
Yeah, interesting. So that's, I know a lot of the people that came into the space maybe more recently are getting scared out of this industry or unable to find properties. So they're doing other things, or they're chasing the next kind of most exciting thing. So it's interesting to hear that there's a lot of new syndicators kind of coming to the table, which is different than what I've been hearing. So
no, that is the case. And you've had a lot of speakers on your podcast talk about multifamily, and I've been on a gazillion worlds talking about multifamily. Money raising, the gentle art of crushing it, is for passive investors, right? And passive investors don't always just have to invest in real estate. Many of us do. Last year, we helped someone buy a professional hockey team. There were investors for that. We helped someone buy kind of a blind pool of a stable of racehorses in Southern California. There were investors for that. And a couple inventions in the medical field where they have their inventions going, and the patent is there. It's time to produce them and market them. And everyone in business needs equity. You go to your bank account, and you go to your parents, and you use everything you have. Then you go to the lender and borrow as much as you can, and then there's a shortfall. And that's when you go out and use and equity. The The SEC said that in 2004, the private placements were about $3 trillion. That's more than the IPOs on Wall Street during the same period of time. Certainly not all real estate. A lot of it is technology and banking and finance, health, but there is quite a bit of real estate. So $3 trillion is an awful lot of money to go into what you and I would talk about Reg D offerings, because 95% of it goes into actually 506B. So that's where all the money is raised. It's just amazing. And all the small companies that have, 100 employees need equity, or up to 500 employees, I guess, is small business. Everyone needs equity, and they can't all go to Wall Street. So it's a busy, busy business.
So that's interesting. I think I heard you at a panel 2 years ago talk about the breakout between B's and C's, and I was shocked to hear how much goes through B. I think you just mentioned 95%.
90.
So that's amazing that 95% of the deals are never marketed publicly, are never advertised, and unless you know somebody, you're never going to hear about 95% of those deals that are actually going on in the marketplace, which is unreal.
That's really the truth. And the volume of the private placements has gone down. Like I said, in 2001, it was pretty close to 5 trillion. And then in 2003, it was about 4. And then last year, it was about 3. So the volume's gone down. The percentages of 506B compared to everything else, and I'm comparing that to a Reg A plus, Grant Cardone. I'm comparing that to 506C and regulation crowdfunding. Still, 95% is 506B. And actually, 506C, the volume in 506C has gone down steadily for the last 3 years. And, if you do a 506C offering and you get 20 new investors, the next time you do an offering, you already have a pre-existing relationship with those people. So maybe you don't need to do a C. I know some of the strategies some of my clients have used in doing a C isn't so much to raise money for this deal, but to find people who they can then get a relationship with and put it in their database. And then the last thing, I'm going on and on about this, but the last thing is, where is most of the money in private placements raised? It's raised by securities firms and broker-dealers, and they have clients. They don't advertise. They don't want to advertise. Their financial planning arm gets all sorts of people to come to them. And if I can use an out-of-date term, they've got a Rolodex full of pre-existing relationships.
Interesting.
They don't need to take money from people they don't know.
Interesting. Okay. So I'm curious, is there a breakout on those type of organizations compared to the syndicators that are doing, there's no breakout there? There's no way of really
I haven't
understanding
seen
what
any statistics.
Okay.
But when I was raising money back when I was a syndicator, Randy, I raised all my money through the broker-dealer network. And actually, some of that was before Reg D came out in 81. And so they didn't need to advertise. No one cared about the advertising role.
Sure. Interesting. Well, and maybe can you dig into that a little bit? 20 years ago, 25 years ago, this whole business started to evolve to where it is today with some new legislation code. So can you talk about that a little bit? What changed?
Sure.
What occurred that really opened this up?
1981. Prior to 1981, we were selling securities. There's no doubt about it. And the rule was really that we could sell to rich and smart people. That was the rule. And so we did questionnaires from people to see what their experience was and everything. And in 81, Reg D came out, and Reg D has 5 different rules, but the most important one, first one, is it defined finally what an accredited investor was. 1981, $1 million of net worth, counting everything, $200,000 of income as a single taxpayer, 300 married filing jointly. $1 million was a lot of money in 81.
Yeah.
200,000 was a lot of 80 in 81. Randy, there were the SEC thought that the 3% of the households in 1981 were accredited. And accredited investors who are rich and smart don't need any protection. But the number was so small that when they came out with the original way to do things, which is now what we call 506B, you could have as many accredited investors as you want. But in order to promote capital raising, they threw in something we'd never heard of, which was a sophisticated investor.
Right.
Someone who knows what's going on. If they read the book through their education or their experience, if they read the PPM, they can understand what's happening and understand the risk, assuming they don't have $1 million or 200,000.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, no one cares if the accredited investor is sophisticated.
Sure.
They're smart and they can take care of themselves. So, which is a crazy law. But anyhow, they put that in there. And so from 81 until the Jobs Act, there was Rule 506. Unlimited accredited investors, 35 sophisticated, because you couldn't advertise. You knew everyone. You had a pre-existing relationship. So they would just let the accredited investors check a box to say that they're accredited, and the syndicators should have an idea if they're telling the truth or not, if they really have a substantive relationship. You know, we're using all sorts of definitions here, right? but anyhow, they would know that. And here, you made a great point. So all the while I was raising money, the people who knew the brokers who were raising money for me would find out about my deals. If you were an investor, but you weren't with one of the brokerage companies that I was raising money with, you wouldn't find my deal. I wouldn't find you because I can't advertise, and vice versa. There was no advertising going on. So I think the SEC simply said, this isn't fair to Trowbridge. All the accredited investors who'd like to find his self-storage deals can't, and he can't find the accredited investors who should be investing with them. So let's come out with a new rule. Well, it's 2012, right? The Jobs Act, 2012, to promote capital formation. They said, let's just move over here right alongside of 50B, which they called it then. We'll make a 6C. And we'll say you can have all the accredited investors you want, advertise. Because you don't know them, we might have to have a third-party verification that they're accredited, and that language is reasonably assured that they're accredited. And so everyone thought that was just going to be great, but that really never.
Sure. Well, it's interesting you say that. So when I first got into this business a few years ago, I had this idea that I was going to do a 506C, and then the floodgates would open and everybody be beating down my door, and gosh, it would be so easy to do this business. And I found that necessarily not the case. That was definitely not.
What did you find that you didn't have that would have made your 506C offering a success? Tell me what it is you think you found.
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge is there is so much noise in the space without a way to really differentiate between the deals, where everybody seems to be pitching essentially the same deal. We're going to double your money in 5 years. You're going to get an X% cash on cash, and everybody's got a track record the length of their arm, right?
That's what I think you were missing. That's what you were missing. You can't go on 506C to start out with no track record. Who's going to send you $50,000? They don't know you. You don't have a track record, and there's a million other people out there who do. So why would they send you the money?
That's it exactly. That is it exactly.
And so I tell my clients all the time, we're not going to do a 506 without a track record. I mean, you do what you want, but from a marketing standpoint, that's not going to be successful.
And I've learned some lessons personally as a very heavy LP investor on working with folks that don't have track record as well. So there's a reason why those LPs don't go flocking to the guys without the track record. So well, thank you for kind of walking through that too. I've never actually had somebody on the show explain 81 and then 2012, how that works. So that
Well,
is
let's
a great backdrop.
let's go on a little bit more. Let's go back
Yeah.
to 2008.
Okay.
There's a big crash in the markets, right? People were losing money in syndications right and left. So Congress, and I'm going somewhere with this,
Sure.
Congress said, there's people out there in California where Trowbridge lives. In 65, they bought a $70,000 house. It's now 2008. That house is paid for. It's worth $4 million. They're living on Social Security and they're accredited. What? What do you mean they're accredited? Rich and smart? They got all their money tied up in their house. They don't have any income. And we're going to give them an opportunity to go into these risky schemes, which would be a quote. So let's take home ownership out of the definition of net worth. Dodd-Frank came along and said if there's any part of the $1 million that has to do with home equity, we need to erase that from the formula. Now, one of the things that the SEC said is when we started this definition of accredited investor, there were 3% of the household.
Mm-hmm.
Now we bring in 506. We bring in 506C. We've never changed the definition of accredited investors. And now they're saying that they're between 19 and 20% of the households in the United States that are accredited. Revenue's gone up. Values have gone up. People maybe who aren't rich and smart are investing in these risky themes. So that's where the thought is in the SEC for the last 4 or 5 years. I go to an SEC conference every April, and we always hear about, well, how are they going to change accredited investor rule? It can't keep going on like this. And one of the arguments is, well, let's apply the cost of living to those numbers. Since 81, it basically triples everything. So you have 3 million net worth, 1,000 individually, and 900,000 married. And they don't think that's going to set well with the public, i.e., the Wall Street people who are selling investments.
Sure.
Not going to sit. So there's some other things. And the most interesting thing I heard last year, and as we're talking now, I'm on my way to that event in the next 3 weeks, is, a lot of people are counting in their $1 million of net worth their retirement savings. Why should we let them risk their retirement savings on these risky schemes? Why don't we just take that out of the definition of net worth?
Interesting. Yeah.
And then maybe increase the revenue, the earnings. Maybe we don't have to triple it, but maybe we should increase the earnings.
Sure.
And that would be interesting. And the proposal that I heard last year, which didn't go anywhere, the proposal was that would drop the number of accredited households to about 13%. And they think that's still too high. It's much higher than 3%.
Mm-hmm.
But if they don't do anything, half of us will be accredited.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like, well, obviously going back to 81, this has probably been a topic that's been discussed pretty regularly on how that adjusts.
In fact, Jobs Act came along and said every 5 years they have to analyze the definition of accredited investor. And this is one of those years. So I know that there's some activity going on, but to get a change would be interesting. And I asked one of the people in the panel, I said, if you take the number of accredited investor households and cut them in half, are you going to raise the number of sophisticated investors from 35? Because if you cut the accredited in half and don't raise the 35, you're going to hurt money raising. And there's a lot of people that today are accredited who now have to fill in the sophisticated a box, and they're going to knock some other people out. Yeah. So, and they said there was no discussion at all of increasing the number from 35. You looked at me like you said, that's a stupid answer. That's stupid. Moving in, I said, I don't think it's a stupid question.
Yeah. Well, it's good to know that we got people like you, at least at the table, having those discussions and hopefully influencing the folks that are driving these changes.
You know Karen Hall.
I do. Yeah, I
Yeah.
actually had her on the podcast a couple of months ago.
I thought that was the case. Well, she and I have been talking about this thing about retirement money being left out. That I don't know if it would be bad for her industry because people still want to save for retirement. It's just that money wouldn't help them become accredited. And she thinks her industry is going to fight that like crazy. That is not from their standpoint. Their industry's heard of that, and they're ready to just. And I know the stockbrokers are ready to quash it.
Oh, I'm sure. But kind of going back to your initial point, where 95% is 506B anyways, maybe what
But the other side of the coin is, I don't know what the statistics are at this moment. I'm having a senior moment because I usually know this, but I will just tell you now that more than 75% of the investors in 506B are accredited. My number one client as far as volatility and number of deals, did 164 deals with me before he kind of went out of the business. All 506B and only accredited investors.
Yeah. Yeah, there seems to be
the box.
this. Yeah, exactly. And then from a risk standpoint, you have less exposure as well, right? As an operator. Yeah, interesting. Well, let's, gosh, I'm looking at the clock here. I've got so many questions I want to ask. So that does bring up a good point. So let's talk about, I do some work with folks that are newer to the space. They've gotten to the point where they've run out of their own money. They're starting to think about raising capital from friends and family. And the question always comes up, like, when does it make sense to do a syndication, or when does it make sense to do a JV, or just like simple promissory note capital raising? So do you have any general guidance you give?
Sure. My first comment is that's the only reason you become a syndicator is you can't buy all the real estate or do all the investing you want to do on your own. So that just flat out, that's why you become a syndicator. That was such a good point. What exactly was your question again? I'm sorry.
So yeah, is there a threshold? Yeah.
Well, let's go back to the definition of syndication. Syndication isn't anything other than two or more getting together to do some business venture. So all the other things you might want to talk about, JV, limited partnership, LLC. That's all IRS stuff, talking about how you bundle people together and what the tax laws are. But a syndication is just bundling them together. In my world, the issue is, have you taken enough of them, and are you going to run it in such a way that it's a security? That's the answer. Are the people investing money in a common enterprise, like the LLC? Are they in it because they're expecting a profit? Sure. But is someone else running the money? Is someone else, through their efforts, making it happen? That's a security. So when you get to, you could have two people in a syndication who are both making the major decisions. Every decision has to be unanimous, so no one is controlling. I didn't say that everyone had to have the same amount of money in. As long as the vote is equal. If there were just two people, I had 80% and you had 20%, and we're going to vote based on our ownership, that's a security because I'm controlling your money. But if I have 80 and you have 20 and our votes are equal, I'm not controlling you and you're not controlling me. But the minute we get into a position that someone is controlling someone else's money, that sounds like something the government would be concerned about. In what investment and who is doing that, which are the two securities laws.
Okay.
So there you go.
Yeah. So is it that's a different
joint venture? I don't know what a joint venture is. Joint ventures are usually general partnerships.
Okay.
But that's, once again, here comes the IRS laying an entity structure on you so we know how things are shared. And then there's the LLC, which can have multiple members. It can also have one member. And there's a limited partnership, which has to have at least two. So every limited partnership is a security because the limiteds can't vote, and the general has total control. Every limited partnership is a security.
So let's take a look at, obviously you got a $100 million purchase, you've got 500 investors, syndication, definitely go out and hire Trowbridge to do SEC, docs, entity creation, all of that.
Yeah, because that's going to be a security for sure.
So on the other hand of the coin, let's say somebody's buying a $100,000 house, doing all of the work, and he's bringing somebody with 50 grand into the deal, and they're going to split the proceeds.
That isn't so important.
Okay.
What's important is control. Who's making the decisions? If the decision in that situation, maybe we might make a decision to put a permanent loan on and keep it and rent it. Is that a unanimous decision? Or maybe we are going to sell it. At what price? Is that a unanimous decision? But in that case, you couldn't let the contractor make all the decisions that affect the investor's $50,000. That's a security.
Okay, but if they have equal voting rights, it's 50 voting.
Once again, I'm not concerned about how much money they have in it.
Right.
It's voting.
Interesting. Okay. And if you had 4 people, everybody has equal voting rights, 25%, that's not a security.
No, that wouldn't be a security. We get into trouble. How easy is it to make a decision with one other person, with 4 other people, with 18 other people? Since it all has to be unanimous. Okay. At some point, you just have to take control.
And then but at any point where the weighting is heavier towards one person on the vote, then that creates interesting. Okay, that's good. That is different advice than I've seen, but that's pretty black and white. It's pretty straightforward, where it makes sense then if there's any overweight on one of the partners or the members of the ownership, then it's time to get Gene on the phone or Gene's team on the phone.
The fourth prong of the definition of an investment contract, which is a security, primarily through the results of another. Okay? So if everyone votes and it's always unanimous, that goes away. So it's an investment money in a common enterprise for a profit, but we're all making our own decisions. The number one thing that the SEC says blows a person's defense that, oh no, this isn't a security, is through the efforts of another and their control of the money.
Got it. Okay. Well, that will be an interesting listen for, I think, a lot of folks on this call and people that I'll reference to as well. But I think it just talks to the point that it's really important to have an expert like you or one of your colleagues as a resource as real estate investors are making these type of decisions on how they're going to manage these assets. So really important.
I could say one thing. I think I know the attorneys that you had on your podcast because there are just about 5 of them, 5 of us who work in this field, and we're all smart. Yeah. We all know what's going on. We all have some different impressions of what the gray area is. And so I wouldn't say that I'm absolutely right on everything. I think I am. I'm the oldest of all of them.
There you go.
Probably been doing this longer than all of them. And
there's some wisdom there. Yeah.
I learned when I was a syndicator for 20 years from 10 other attorneys who I hired. I learned things. So the culmination of all of my education shows up in my answers. Okay. So I hope I'm right, but I'm clearly conservative.
Yeah. No, and I think it makes sense. There's a lot of risk in these when people have very large majority of their net worth and other people's net worth tied up in these deals to take a conservative approach to these type of decisions.
Plus, the syndicator is my client. So I don't represent the passives. And I have my documents that sometimes have been criticized because they lean too much toward the lead. Well, yeah, but the other side of the coin is the lead is going to have to make this thing work. So we need to give the lead all the tools to overcome, 35 crazy passives.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the crazy passives that are listening, that's not directed towards you, of course, but definitely heard, Gene. Well, very good. Well, like I said, gosh, I feel like I could have you for another 2 hours and not get all the questions that I asked.
Well, you could have me back.
I think that would make sense, definitely.
Back, and then we'll get to those other questions.
Excellent.
But here's one question you were going to ask me that I really want to answer because it's my favorite answer. The 4 things a passive should ask.
Okay.
The 4 things a passive should ask before they invest. Number 1, Randy, if I give you my $50,000 and invest in your deal, what happens if something happens to you?
So succession planning.
Continuity. The bank's going to require it. Your marketing will be severely handicapped if you are the only person. In fact, I won't write your documents. Number 1. Number 2, Randy, have you done this before? Okay, and every one of us who became a syndicator, Randy, has had to answer that question, no, to start with. But we must have had something else in our world that would encourage our friends and family to invest with us in our first deal, because that's what we need. So, number 3, are you putting any of your own money in this deal, Randy? Do you have any skin in the game? Okay, and that can go any different way, but that's kind of interesting. If you say no,
Yeah.
that's not a good marketing pitch. And the last one is, if something happens to me, Randy, Gene, how do I get my money out of this? And Randy says, well, we're going to have professionally drafted operating agreement that has a section 12 and 13 on voluntary liquidity and involuntary liquidity, and I want you to read it, and I'll go over it with you. We've got all that covered. Not once did I ask you, Randy, what's the IRR? What's the multiple? What type of property is it? Where is it? Not once did I ask. I don't care about any of those things until you answer those 4 questions. You may only have to answer them for me once. And then we start a relationship. But I'm sure the first time I'm going to ask you that.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. So that's the first pass of due diligence questions everybody should be asking.
Right.
Very good. Very
Because
good.
it's a people business. When it's all said and done, it's a people business. And the manager is a people, and the investors are a people, and they've got to work together. Over there, that's just a pile of bricks. But it's a people business. That's why I got out of the business. If you read my biography, at one time I sent out 1,687 K1s in 1 year, and representing about 900 investors. And I had a small company, but I realized if I was going to continue, it wouldn't be a small company anymore. So I went home and sat around the kitchen table with my wife, where all the great decisions in my life have been made. And I said, I think I'm going to quit that. I've always wanted to go to law school. So at 45, I went to law school, and now I've been doing this for 30 years.
For you. Good for you. That's amazing. And I suspect we're a week away from the tax deadline. I suspect your tax season is a little less stressful than it used to be, sending out 1,600 K1s.
Yeah, that was. And in those days, it was licking the stamps and licking the envelope.
Sure.
Well, we're talking a long time ago.
Yeah.
So it is stressful. And it's funny, right now as we speak, Randy, I have 4 offerings for clients that are going to hit the street this month, and they're all dated April 16th.
The day after. Yeah, that is funny. That is funny. Well, and those will be launched by the time this episode is published. So people listening to this call might see some of Gene Trowbridge's PPMs out there floating around. So very good.
Be great.
Well, very good. Well, I do have a few questions I'd love to ask before we wrap up. These are quick, but
okay.
Would love to get your thoughts on these. So is there an educational resource that's geared towards the LP investor that you might suggest for folks to continue their education journey?
There are probably 10 people out there who have courses and masterminds on this. I would say YouTube.
Yep.
I would search YouTube and see who, and you and I know who all these people are, and they all have great training programs. The cost is different. The involvement is different. What they're trying to get to is different, but they all have some experience. One thing I thought was interesting, someone right now has a deal that he's pitching on Instagram, I think. After I raised $10 million, I wrote a book on how to invest in apartments. Well, that's nothing. After I use my second razor blade, I can tell you what I need to do. That's a rookie. Don't read that book.
All right. Is there a current podcast or book that you're listening to? It doesn't have to even be real estate related.
It doesn't have to be real estate, so I'm going to brag myself. We have a podcast. My family has a podcast, and it's called Hey, Am I Adopted? And we're all four of us are adopted. And so this is what the podcast is about. We interview people who are adopted and learn their stories. It's very, very fascinating. We're in the second year of this. And if anyone's interested in that, they can just go to info@Hey, Am I Adopted? And we'll respond to you. And maybe you'd like to be interviewed, Randy. There you go.
I love it. No, definitely. Spread to the listeners, spread the word. Like I have a handful of folks that I'm going to send Gene's way because the people that I know that are adopted, it's a small island and they want to talk, they want to connect and talk with other people that are adopted as well. So actually, Gene, could you share too, like the significance around your family, why you decided to do that podcast? You mentioned a number of people in your family that are adopted.
Four of us. And we lost a daughter through drug addiction. She had been an addict for 17 years and finally died. And her world was abandonment and rejection, starting with being adopted. Three of us were adopted right through the Catholic social service when we were weeks old, and my wife was adopted when she was 2. So we've all had the abandonment, and I've gone out to try to find my parents. Amy would never do that, ever. Mm-hmm. Emily is thinking about it. Emily's 43. In fact, she just got married again on Friday.
Oh, wow.
In the 2 years we've been doing this podcast, she's been thinking more about what it means to her and what the risk and reward. The risk is you hurt your parents if you're going out to find someone. You hurt them if you find them and they're not interested in you finding them. You hurt their family. And then what do you get out of it? So those 3 risks are compared to the reward. Well, what's the reward? I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. I know that's a personal thing, but I'm sure it'll connect with folks that are on the show listening as well.
Thanks,
so thank
Randy.
You. Yeah. All right. Well, final question before we wrap it up, Gene. If you had $100,000 you needed to invest today and you couldn't put it in one of your deals or even one of your clients' deals, let's say that, where would you invest it?
Today, I'd put it in a debt fund. I would give up maybe a 3 to 5 year debt fund. I would give up appreciation for security and current yield.
Holding capital in a debt fund as well. So
that's what I would do. And some of my clients who are now raising money for things like that have found that money raise is a little easier than an equity fund today.
All right, Gene. Well, thank you so much. This has been great. We definitely will have you back on the show because I've got a whole list here of other questions. But this has been great, Gene. For those that are trying to find you or interested in your services or getting to know you more, where can folks find you?
Well, our website is T as in Tom, N as in Nancy, LLP.com. So TNLLP.com. And you can reach me at gene@tnllp.com. And Google me or find me. YouTube. I'm all over the place. That would be great. Love to have a consultation, or I don't call them consultations. I call them homework calls. Let's have a homework call and figure out what it is we need to do and how do we need to get started.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun, and we'll certainly have you back.
Good. I look forward to it.
Awesome. All right. To the audience, as always, we encourage you to continue that education journey. And more importantly than that, we encourage you to make the decision to make your first or your next passive investment. I'm convinced that once you do, you'll just be at a point where you wish that you had started that much sooner. So be sure to join us again next Thursday for another great episode. And thanks so much for joining us today.
Bye, Randy.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Another episode of The Gentle Art of Crushing It. It was an amazing episode. We know we sure learned a lot, and we hope you did as well. We want to take a second and thank you so much for viewing or listening to this episode. And please just know that we only ask for one favor, and that is to make this life magnificent. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.